This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidou-Ewart. It's Tuesday, June 11th. This is Africa 54. South Sudan's displaced residents return home as the security situation improves. We'll take an inside look at how climate change is forcing coffee farmers to adapt. And grim findings in a new World Health Organization report on the rate of new curable sexually transmitted infections. The outlook in South Sudan is looking brighter. On the heels of a new peace agreement, there has been a reduction in violence. After years of civil war, many displaced families now have the confidence to return to their homes. They begin their long journey just after dawn, packing up their meager belongings, waving goodbye to their friends and traveling to the UN's air terminal to catch a flight home. 5 helicopters headed out one after the other, ferrying 86 displaced people, mostly women and children, to Ui in the Jonglei region of South Sudan. They are welcomed by friends and family who they have not seen for years.
I had wanted to come here since last year but couldn't make it. Now I thank God that I'm here in Ui with my children. I believe that my suffering is finally over.
More than 3,000 people who had sought sanctuary in UN protection sites during the conflict have expressed their desire to return home. It is a major logistical exercise involving UNMISS and humanitarian partners, including UNHCR, which is the agency leading the process.
I thank the UN for the 6 years they have been hosting us in the protection of civilian site from 2013 to 2019. It is good work that they have protected victims until we reach the point where we can survive on our own.
It is a rewarding experience for the UN peacekeepers too, as they witness the safe return of the families they have supported and kept safe since the civil war erupted in 2013.
Just by sending them back to the environment that they love, with their relatives, that is also in a way protecting them. They are moving from a situation where it's like, you've seen a POC, it's like you're locked in somewhere. But when they go back home, they're now free to do other things like cultivation, farming, fishing, business even go back to, some people can go back to school. So we are trying to facilitate them to move on their lives.
This group of 86 returnees represent just a few of the millions of refugees and displaced families who are beginning their journey home as peace spreads across the country and the more prosperous future they've been dreaming of finally becomes a reality. A prominent South Sudanese economist has been sentenced to 2 years in prison Tuesday for disturbing the peace because he granted interviews to foreign media after he was arrested on treason charges in July 2018. Those charges were subsequently dropped. Peter Biar Ajak had been convicted for speaking to Voice of America Radio. His lawyer says he will appeal the conviction, saying the decision was in conflict with the country's constitution, especially freedom of expression. Ajak has been publicly critical of the way President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar approached peace talks to end the civil war. Botswana's High Court handed down a bold decision on Tuesday, decriminalizing homosexuality and overturning a colonial-era law that punished gay sex by up to 7 years in prison. Same-sex relationships are illegal in more than 70 countries worldwide. Almost half of them are in Africa, where homosexuality is still broadly taboo and persecution is rife. The case, which had been brought by a university student, argued that the government should eliminate the law in light of a changed society where homosexuality is more widely accepted. Many shops and businesses in the Sudanese capital remained closed on Tuesday as troops patrolled the streets of Khartoum on the third day of a civil disobedience campaign called by the opposition. Their aim is to force the nation's military leaders into handing over power to a civilian administration. The campaign follows a crackdown by security forces which killed dozens of people and the collapse of talks between the military and the opposition. The violence is prompting concern from world powers, including the United States, which announced Monday that it was sending its senior diplomat for Africa, Tibor Nagy, to Sudan this week to push for the resumption of talks on a transition. Malian President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta is responding to the attack in central Mali on a Dogon village by perpetrators believed to belong to the Fulani ethnic group. Sunday's overnight violence killed at least 95 people. Keïta, who was in Switzerland attending a UN labor conference, cut short his visit to return home, where he urged the nation to remain calm.
Mali's at crossroads. If what has just happened the other night should be followed by another massacre in another place involving another community or another faith, it would be an endless tragedy which I do not wish on our country, God willing. So I think it is time. It is advisable that we find ourselves again.
Violence between Dogon hunters and Fulani herders has killed hundreds of people since January, including an attack in March in which gunmen killed more than 150 Fulanis. The debate over climate change in the United States is happening at a political level. But if you ask farmers anywhere in the world if climate change is a reality, then there's little debate. Many coffee growers are worried about the reality of climate change. Here's VOA's Kevin Enox.
The world relies on its morning coffee, and that's particularly evident at the World Coffee Fair being held in Berlin this year. One thing these growers have in common is that climate change is forcing them to alter the way they do business. The tropics are prime coffee-growing regions, and extreme weather is threatening their crops.
That climate change also helps diseases to spread easier. We have a new type of diseases that are more resilient, and also that relocates the water resources, and it makes more difficult for farmers to get access to water. And coffee is a product that depends a lot on water.
A warming climate isn't all bad news for farmers, but water shortages are a growing problem.
Yes, climate change is definitely real. In our case, we have been able to grow coffee in higher altitudes because of it, but it is negative when it comes to rains and something like that, because there's not enough. So again, if we can find good markets with good prices, we can support farms with irrigation systems and some other ways where we can try to balance the lack of or the climate change.
And the unpredictable weather that comes with climate change is something farmers are still trying to understand.
The old producers, the old generation say that before, the patterns were very well determined. When summer came, it was summer. It was harvesting season. When rain came, it was rainy. It was rainy season, fertilization season, spraying season. Nowadays, we have to adapt to the different changes of the weather pattern.
But the demand for the bitter brew is still strong. The world drinks over 2.2 billion cups of coffee every day. Kevin Enox, VOA News.
Online data is constantly at risk. Hackers are getting smarter, and companies worldwide are facing a shortage of trained professionals who can help protect their data. To fill this gap, the U.S. government is beefing up its efforts to recruit the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. VOA's Sahar Majid filed this report, narrated by Bezan Hamdad.
Wars between developed countries are not limited to battlefields. Nowadays, countries are launching cyber attacks to steal valuable information from their rival nations.
Our adversaries know that they can't fight a war with us on the battlefield, so what they're doing is trying to attack us in other ways.
According to the Cybersecurity Ventures magazine, by 2021 there will be 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally. Filling these positions is going to be a challenge for companies.
Cybersecurity is a very challenging field. If you think about preparation of a person, that person has to have some technical background in many directions. It might start with things like computers, networks, mobile networks, Internet of Things, and the list is growing every year, so it's very difficult to keep it current.
To fill the cybersecurity skills gap, the U.S. government is funding scholarships at universities across the country.
I had always had a love of computer science. I had taken computer science classes in undergrad, so I had that love. And when I knew I wanted to get a master's degree, I wanted to get something that was really impactful.
Scholarship recipient Natalie Larson is studying cybersecurity at Johns Hopkins University. Larson encourages more women to pursue this male-dominated field.
Because of how cybersecurity professionals are portrayed in the media. So all movies and TV shows, so people with hoodies in basements and dark rooms, and they're most normally men. And so I think women don't even think of it as an option because, you know, a little girl sees all these men as cybersecurity professionals, and she doesn't picture herself. So I think it's important that women get out there and show their faces as like, I'm a cybersecurity professional, you know, you can be one too, we're here.
Only American citizens or permanent residents of the United States are eligible for these scholarships. At the end of the program, graduates are expected to work at a U.S. government agency for a period equivalent to the length of the scholarship. For Sahar Majid, Bejan Hamdard, VOA News.
The International Media Freedom Advocate, Reporters Without Borders, ranks Russia at number 149 in its 2019 World Press Freedom Index, about 100 positions below the United States, which is ranked 48th. This report, narrated by Philip Alexiou, Ricardo Marquina, and Olga Pavlova in Moscow, looks at cases that show the difficulties that reporters encounter while trying to exercise independent journalism in President Vladimir Putin's Russia.
Hundreds of protesters demonstrate in front of the detention center where police held Russian journalist Ivan Galanov, a reporter from Meduza, an independent publication accused of having a narcotics laboratory in his home. Galanov, who reports on cases of Russian government corruption, rejects the accusations and says the charges are trumped up, a sentiment shared by his editors and supporters.
It is true stupidity to think that someone who writes about corruption in Moscow would have a drug laboratory in his home.
The case of Ivan Galanov, now jailed for 2 months, comes shortly after a scandal shook Kommersant, one of the country's most respected newspapers. The paper suddenly fired 2 of its political reporters after an article quoting anonymous sources said Valentina Matvienko, chair of the Federation Council and one of the most influential people in the country, was on her way out.
We have been repeatedly writing about possible personnel replacements, and each time we faced a possibility that someone might dislike that. This time, we certainly did not expect such a reaction that might later lead to such consequences.
The writer's dismissal brought an expected reaction. The newspaper's entire political staff quit, 10 journalists in all.
When I learned they were being dismissed for doing their jobs, I was in charge of releasing the publication, of putting items on the front page. I thought that under such a situation, one cannot go on with one's job.
The incident, observers say, reflects the current state of journalism in Russia, where it is not advisable to write anything negative about the state.
Someone should now realize that journalists writing about politics, aside from their own editors, have internal censors. People realize it is pointless to write on some subjects because it will be an article that will never be published.
Journalists working for the Meduza online newspaper, Deutsche television channel, or the Echo of Moscow radio station are among the few who are not under direct control of the state or of oligarchs who are close to the Kremlin. Their work has been difficult for years. Observers say that during President Vladimir Putin's current term, it is becoming not only more complicated, but sometimes more dangerous. For Olga Pavlova and Ricardo Marquina in Moscow, Philip Alexiou, VOA News.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, co-chair of the Global Commission on the Future of Work, has been looking into employment problem for the past 18 months. The Commission's landmark report, released in January, is being debated and considered for adoption by the International Labour Organization. Ramaphosa says the threats to work posed by technological advances, the growth of artificial intelligence, automation and robotics require a human-centered response. The bottom line, he says, involves investment in decent and sustainable work. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Stay with us.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
Au Merveille is Touba's first high-end patisserie. But what's innovative is that it is 40% financed by crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is in the early stages in Senegal. M&A Capital, an investment fund and majority investors in Au Merveille, say that it is partly due to tradition and customs in a country where people lend to family members and friends, but don't give money to strangers. There is also no regulatory framework to define the crowdfunding rules, a major challenge to its growth. Another roadblock is internet access. Crowdfunding relies on internet penetration and usage. The average penetration in Africa stood at 29% in 2015, although Senegal is close to 50%. Next up, Google has opened pre-orders for its game streaming service, which will launch in November with more than 30 games from at least 21 publishers. The Stadia Founders Edition package, priced at $130, will enable consumers to play video games such as Destiny 2 from the launch day on nearly any device without any downloads, making access to games potentially as easy as watching a YouTube video. The Founders package includes a special edition gaming controller, a Chromecast Ultra streaming media stick for televisions, and the ability to gift Stadia Pro to a friend. And finally, an Israeli university is developing a drone which can fly through the air and be driven across the ground. Flying Star, or F-Star, features propellers and wheels, which are both operated by the same motors. It can fold its legs upwards by 55 degrees to make its base short to fit through narrow gaps. It can also fly at 54 kilometers per hour and be driven at just under 10 kilometers per hour. Researchers say the technology could be used for delivering packages, in agriculture, for maintenance, cleaning, filming, and entertainment. Its ability to get to hard-to-reach areas means it could also be used in search and rescue operations. And that's what's trending today.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is defending the Trump administration's deal with Mexico to curb the flow of Central American migrants to the U.S.-Mexican border and to avert punitive tariffs on Mexico threatened by President Donald Trump. Critics say that the Friday night agreement breaks little new ground. VOA Cindy Sain has more from the State Department.
The problem of Central American migrants heading towards the U.S. southern border has been addressed in a new way, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says, in a deal that reflects diplomacy at its finest.
Those crossing the U.S. southern border to seek asylum will be rapidly returned to Mexico, where they may await their adjudication of their asylum claims. We've seen this before. We were able to do this to the tune of a couple of hundred people per day. We now have the capacity to do this full throttle and engage this in a way that will make a fundamental difference in the calculus for those deciding to transit Mexico to try to get into the United States.
Asked how this deal is different from previous negotiations, Pompeo said the scale of the deal and the commitment from Mexico this time are different, and that these agreements would not have happened without the president's threat of tariffs. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortega.
We expect to see dramatic reductions in the coming weeks and months, and I would say that the Mexican government was incredibly confident in the actions that they were taking that we would see dramatic reduction.
At the White House later Monday, a reporter asked President Donald Trump about what he called an additional secret agreement with Mexico, after Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard said there is no agreement beyond the one that was outlined in detail Friday.
Well, we have an agreement on something that they will announce very soon. It's all done. And they have to get approval, and they will get approval. If they don't get approval, we'll have to think in terms of tariffs or whatever. But it's just another aspect of what we've done. It was all done because of the tariffs and because of the relationship that we have with Mexico. I spoke with the president yesterday.
In a joint statement with the U.S. Friday, Mexico said it will deploy 6,000 National Guard members along its southern border with Guatemala, and that both countries will review the success of the actions in 45 days. The tariffs would have started Monday, but Trump suspended them indefinitely. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
It's time for our health segment, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lenore Mudu with news on an outbreak of measles right here in the U.S.
That's right. It's ongoing, and a report by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the number of measles cases confirmed in the United States in 2019 has reached over 1,000. The total for 2019 has already reached the highest point in any year since 1992. Measles is a highly contagious disease that is usually spread through sneezing and coughing. It can linger in the air for up to 2 hours. Cases have been reported in more than half of U.S. states. New York State has the highest total, with nearly 700 cases reported this year. Most of those cases have been in Orthodox Jewish communities in Brooklyn and Queens, where there are low vaccination rates. The CDC says the outbreaks in New York City and Rockland County, New York, threatened to nullify America's status of having officially eliminated measles. 25% of Ebola infections in eastern Congo are going undetected or are found too late, according to the World Health Organization. Over 2,000 cases have been recorded in eastern Congo, and more than 1,300 people have died since the epidemic erupted in August in 2018 in North Kivu and Ituri provinces. But the actual total may be even worse.
And we need to move away from a vicious cycle of where we have late detection of cases, and late detection of cases is still a problem. Community deaths are still a problem. When someone dies in the community, it's a disaster. It's a disaster for the community, but it's a disaster for the response, because that person has been in the community potentially infecting others. So we must get earlier detection of cases. We must have more exhaustive identification of contacts. We need to convince all of those contacts to accept vaccination. 90% is great. 90% of people after vaccine take the vaccine. It's not them that matter now, it's the 10% that don't, because all of our cases are coming from that group. We need to make sure when people are sick that we can get them to isolation and to treatment quicker, because number one, they'll infect less people, but more importantly, they stand a very good chance of survival if they reach an Ebola treatment unit in good condition.
The World Health Organization says greater political engagement is needed to combat the Ebola outbreak. Now to another serious problem. A new report released by the World Health Organization once again reveals that no considerable improvement has been made in curbing sexually transmitted infections. More than 1 million people each day worldwide are diagnosed with sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, according to the World Health Organization. The UN Health Agency says 1 in every 25 people globally has at least one of 4 sexually transmitted infections: chlamydia, gonorrhea, trichomoniasis, and syphilis. Some people have more than one sexually transmitted disease.
These sexually transmitted infections can have serious health consequences. For example, these infections can cause infertility, adverse pregnancy outcomes, and also adverse birth outcomes, such as stillbirth, neonatal death, and low birth weight.
Medical experts say sexually transmitted infections are transmitted through unprotected sex. In some cases, the diseases are passed from mother to child during pregnancy. Syphilis can also be transmitted through contact with infected blood. In a recently released report, the WHO says in 2016 there were more than 376 million new cases of STIs among men and women aged 15 to 49. 127 million new cases of chlamydia, 87 million of gonorrhea, 6 million of syphilis, and 156 million of trichomoniasis.
Now, these 4 curable STI infections can be treated with currently available antibiotics. However, these numbers are very high and indicate a very high health risk.
The International Health Body says STIs are preventable through safe sexual practices, including correct and consistent condom use and sexual health education. Timely and affordable testing and treatment are crucial for reducing the burden of STIs worldwide, alongside efforts to encourage people who are sexually active to get screened for sexually transmitted diseases.
STIs are very common, and we can all do something about it. As policymaker, make sex safe and support STI control. Please do not reduce the budget on STI control and sexual health. Better still, increase it. As healthcare providers, do not be the source of stigma. Treat STIs like any other infection. Treat STI patients with respect and understanding. For parents and teachers, provide skills to your children. Let them know the basics of prevention, and also make sure that they understand all these different issues about sexually transmitted infections.
The WHO further recommends that pregnant women should be systematically screened for syphilis as well as HIV. The findings were published online by the Bulletin of the World Health Organization. Since the last published data in 2012, there has been no substantive decline in either the rates of new or existing infections.
Thank you.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Esther?
Fantastic reporting today, Lenore, as usual. And be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.